My name is Riley Hart, and at 32, I'm the quiet daughter who left Maple Ridge, Oregon, with a secondhand laptop and a head full of code. What my family never knew is that I built Bright Path Learning, an education tech company that now helps tens of thousands of kids read a little faster and dream a little bigger. I came home for my birthday expecting nothing fancy, maybe a backyard dinner, my mom's lemon sheet cake, a small chance to feel like someone's favorite for once. Instead, at our wobbly kitchen table, my mom folded her hands and said carefully, "Honey, we had to cancel your birthday dinner at Pine and Stone. We're putting the money toward Evan's destination engagement weekend in Tulum. Flights jumped again and he can't miss it." That old ache, the one with my name on it, found its way back under my ribs. Evan is my younger brother, golden hour lighting personified, the family's front row story. I smiled like it didn't sting and said I understood. I always do. 2 nights later, we were eating takeout when my phone lit up on the table. I wouldn't have answered, but my mom waved. "Go ahead, sweetie. If your office needs you." I put on speaker. "Ms. Hart," my assistant said, crisp, apologetic, "the Smithsonian Education Forum moved your keynote to Monday. The driver is outside at 9 in the morning, and legal needs your approval on the $12.4 million pilot before we wire it. Also, board wants you to pick between Delta One or the charter." Silence. Fork stalled midair. My mother stared. My brother blinked. And I realized the secret I'd kept for years had just walked into the room, pulled out a chair and sat down. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, stick with me. And hey, drop a comment if you've been there, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. I grew up in Maple Ridge, Oregon, a town so small that the grocery store still had a bulletin board with paper flyers pinned by thumbtacks. Our house was a weather-beaten 2-story with peeling white paint and a porch swing that squeaked every time you leaned back too far. Inside lived my parents, Martin and Diane Hart, and my younger brother Evan, 5 years my junior and the sun around which our family orbited. From the beginning, the roles were carved deep. I was the steady child, the one who could be left in a corner with crayons or a book and not be heard from for hours. Evan, on the other hand, was fireworks, demanding, bright, impossible to ignore. My parents loved us both, but love wears different costumes. For me, it was quiet nods, brief pats on the shoulder, practical advice. For Evan, it was spotlights and applause. I still remember one Sunday when I was 8. I came rushing into the kitchen with a spelling test in my hand. Every word correct, the gold star shining at the top. My dad looked up from the sports section long enough to mutter, "Good job, kiddo," then buried himself in the box scores again. That same evening, Evan, then only 3, stacked a few blocks in a crooked tower. My mom gasped, clapped her hands, and exclaimed, "He's a natural builder." That tower earned him ice cream at Dairy Queen, while my test got folded into a drawer and forgotten. This pattern became the rhythm of my childhood. Straight A's were expected, not celebrated. When I made the honor roll year after year, my mother simply said, "While Riley studies hard." While Evan's participation trophy from soccer was polished, displayed, and carried to church socials so she could tell everyone how talented he was. Money told its own story. Dad worked long shifts as a mechanic. Mom taught 2nd grade. We weren't wealthy, but somehow there was always cash for Evan's pursuits. Travel soccer teams, expensive cleats, private trumpet lessons, the latest gadgets. When I asked about a graphing calculator for math camp, I was told the budget was tight. At 15, I picked up weekend shifts at the diner, wiping tables and pouring endless cups of burnt coffee, so I could afford my own summer program. One memory seared into me. My 16th birthday. I had invited a few friends over, saved up to buy my own little sheet cake from the bakery. The night before, my mom told me gently that we'd have to postpone. Evan's got a regional band competition in Salem, honey. We can't be in 2 places at once. I blew out 16 candles alone a week later, the frosting already crusted at the edges, whispering a wish I never told anyone. "Please, just once, let me matter more." Evan wasn't cruel. In fact, when it was just the 2 of us, we sometimes laughed and shared secrets. But even then, he carried the unshakable confidence of someone who had never been overlooked. He didn't need to fight for space at the table, it was given to him. By the time I graduated high school, the roles had calcified. Evan was the dreamer destined for great things. I was the responsible one, destined to understand, to need less, to sacrifice without complaint. That was the unspoken contract in our family, signed in small slights and quiet omissions. And while I learned to carry it with a smile, each forgotten birthday, each missed recital, each casual dismissal left its mark. They weren't scars visible to the eye, but they shaped me just the same. When I left Maple Ridge for college, I carried little more than a duffel bag, a used laptop, and the weight of years of being the background character in my own home. My parents helped Evan with tuition at a private music academy, but for me, there were budget constraints. So I pieced together scholarships, loans, and the savings from those diner shifts. Every semester felt like a tightrope walk. One missed payment, and I'd be packing my bags back to Oregon. While my peers spent weekends at football games or parties, I was at the campus library, coding until the fluorescent lights flickered overhead. I tutored freshmen in math, waited tables at a late-night diner, even sold plasma when money got too tight. Sleep became optional, determination didn't. I'll never forget walking past Evan's social media posts, new trumpet, new road trips, carefree weekends with friends, while I calculated whether I could afford both groceries and textbooks. The contrast stung, not because I begrudged him, but because I knew deep down he would never be asked to make those kinds of choices. After graduation, I landed an entry-level software job in Seattle. The pay was modest, but it felt like a miracle. My apartment was a cramped studio above a noisy bar, and the floor creaked whenever I crossed it. Still, it was mine, and every month I sent a chunk of my paycheck home, ostensibly to help with Evan's schooling, though no one had asked me to. Part of me hoped it might finally earn me a line in one of my parents' stories, some acknowledgement beyond. Riley's doing fine. The sacrifices didn't stop there. When my company downsized, I took on freelance gigs, juggling 3 contracts at once, teaching myself new languages while surviving on instant noodles. Meanwhile, family phone calls were filled with Evan's triumphs, his jazz solos, his trips to music festivals, the European internship my parents proudly helped fund. I was the one who nodded, who asked questions, who said, "That's wonderful," even when the silence afterward pressed heavy on my chest. There were nights when exhaustion blurred my vision, when I laid my head on the desk and wondered if anyone would notice if I simply stopped trying. But some stubborn fire inside me refused to go out. I told myself that if I worked hard enough, built something undeniable, then maybe, just maybe, the scales would tip. And so I poured every ounce of myself into my work. I skipped vacations, skipped holidays, skipped the chance to date or build friendships outside of colleagues. The world narrowed down to lines of code, and the stubborn belief that someday, the recognition I longed for would come, not from headlines, not from investors, but from the people who once forgot to buy me a birthday cake. It was supposed to be my 32nd birthday weekend, a chance, however small, to feel noticed. I had called ahead, told my parents I wanted to spend it with them, and Mom assured me they'd made reservations at Pine and Stone, the nicest restaurant in Maple Ridge. For a fleeting moment, I let myself believe this year might be different. When I arrived, the house smelled like home, lavender detergent and the faint grease of Dad's garage clothes. Evan breezed in a few minutes later, all charm and swagger. Fresh off teaching a private lesson, he charged more for than I made in a week back when I was his age. Dinner that night was lively, centered around Evan's latest plans. His engagement, his fiancée's Instagram dreams, their big destination weekend in Tulum. My parents listened with rapt attention, eyes sparkling. It wasn't until dessert that Mom cleared her throat. She reached across the table, patted my hand, and said, "Sweetheart, about Pine and Stone tomorrow, we had to cancel. The flights to Mexico jumped in price, and Evan needs to book this week. We thought pizza here at home would be just as nice." The words hit like a glass shattering in slow motion. A birthday I'd dare to hope for, traded away as casually as clipping a coupon. My father shifted uncomfortably. "You understand, Riley. Evan's at a pivotal moment in his life. This engagement could open doors for him." I forced a smile so brittle it might have cracked. "Of course. Pizza sounds great." Evan gave a sheepish grin. but the excitement in his eyes betrayed no real regret. I told him we could wait on booking, he said half-heartedly. But the retreat schedule is fixed. This is kind of once in a lifetime for me. I nodded, though inside the familiar weight of invisibility pressed down harder than ever. The next evening, my birthday celebration amounted to a delivery box of mushroom pizza, my least favorite, and a grocery store cake with "Happy Birthday, Riley" scrawled in uneven icing. My name wasn't even spelled right. No one noticed. Dad asked vaguely about my computer job. Mom quickly shifted the conversation back to Evan's travel itinerary, and I sat there, pushing pizza crust around my plate, pretending it didn't matter. Then my phone buzzed. Jessica, my assistant, was calling. Normally, I'd excuse myself, step into another room, but Mom waved dismissive. "Go ahead, honey. We know your little office probably needs you even tonight." Something in her tone, condescending, thoughtless, made me answer on speaker. "Boss," Jessica said briskly. "Sorry to interrupt family time, but the Smithsonian Forum rescheduled your keynote for Monday. The board approved the $12.4 million pilot, so we'll need your signature before funds release. Also, the charter is booked for DC. They want you in first thing. Should I confirm the suite at the Hay Adams, or do you prefer the Willard?" The silence in the room was absolute. Dad's fork clattered onto his plate. Mom froze mid-sip of wine. Evan's mouth hung open. I tried to keep my voice even. "Thank you, Jessica. I'll review everything in the morning." "Of course, boss. Happy birthday again." She hung up. When I looked up, 3 pairs of eyes were locked on me, wide, bewildered, and for the first time in years, entirely focused on me. Dad leaned forward, voice rough. "Riley, what the hell was that?" And I knew in that instant, the truth I had hidden for nearly a decade could no longer stay buried. The silence that followed Jessica's call stretched until it felt like a weight pressing on my chest. My father's face had gone pale, his hands trembling slightly as they rested on the table. My mother looked as though she had been caught mid-step, suspended between pride and disbelief. Evan leaned back, arms crossed, his expression flickering between shock and something sharper. Envy, maybe, or defensiveness. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. "That was my assistant," I said carefully. "I run a company, Bright Path Learning. It's mine." Mom blinked. "But you said you worked in software. We thought you were just in some office." "I let you think that," I admitted, my throat tight. "I wanted you to see me, without needing titles or dollar signs. I thought maybe, someday, you'd ask more than still the same job. But you never did." Dad's eyes darted down to the newspaper puzzle he had abandoned, then back up at me. "So you've been lying?" The word stung. "No. I just stopped offering pieces of myself no one cared to hold. For the first time in my life, the table was mine. Every eye on me. Every breath, waiting for my next words. And yet, instead of triumph, all I felt was exhaustion. Years of shouldering the invisible. Years of waiting for someone to notice I existed beyond utility." Mom's lip trembled. "We didn't know. We always thought you were fine on your own." There it was. The quiet curse of my childhood. Because I could endure, they assumed I needed less. Because I didn't demand, they assumed I deserved less. The hurt that had simmered beneath my skin for decades finally spilled over. You canceled my 16th birthday for Evan's band competition. You forgot my 18th until 2 days later. My 21st passed with nothing but a $20 bill and a card. And now my 32nd, downgraded to pizza and a misspelled cake because Evan needed plane tickets. My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. Do you have any idea how small that makes a person feel? To grow up believing your milestones are disposable, your achievements invisible. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Dad rubbed his temples, as if he could press the truth away. Evan shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. I felt the heat of humiliation rise in my chest. I wanted to storm out, to slam the door and let them stew in silence. But another part of me, the little girl who once wished on stale frosting, wanted them to finally understand. Every time you chose Evan's needs over mine, I told myself it was okay. I told myself I was strong enough to handle it. But the truth? It hollowed me out. It taught me I could work myself to the bone, achieve things you can't even imagine, and still be unseen in my own family. Do you know what that does to a person? The tears came hot and fast, and I didn't bother to stop them. I was 32 years old, sobbing at the same kitchen table where I had once sat with spelling tests, uncut birthday cakes, and a heart that never stopped hoping. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with everything unsaid, decades of neglect, decades of me swallowing pain so no one else had to taste it. Now, at last, the flavor was theirs too. And in the quiet wreckage of that moment, I realized, whether they understood or not, whether they apologized or not, I could never go back to being invisible again. The morning after that storm of revelations, the house was eerily quiet. I woke in my childhood bedroom, staring at the same faded wallpaper of stars and moons. But I wasn't the same person who had grown up under it. Something in me had shifted. At breakfast, Evan barely met my eyes. My mother fluttered around the kitchen, overcompensating with pancakes and fresh squeezed juice, as though food could glue over cracks decades deep. Dad sat stiffly at the table, his coffee cooling untouched. I broke the silence. I'm heading back to Seattle today. But before I go, there's something I need to say. Their eyes snapped to me, wary. I've built Bright Path into a company with contracts across the country. Last month, the Department of Education signed on. We're opening new offices, one in New York, one in Chicago, and another in Portland, which means I'll be close. Evan frowned. So what, you're just here to rub it in? Show us how much better your life is? I turned to him. No, Evan. I'm here to tell you the truth. I'm not invisible anymore. I won't be the afterthought, the fallback, the one who always understands while everyone else gets celebrated. That version of me is gone. Dad's jaw tightened. Riley, we never meant. You did mean it. I interrupted softly, not maliciously, but every choice, every forgotten birthday, every dollar spent on Evan while I worked 3 jobs, it all added up. You made me believe I was second best. And I believed it so hard, I nearly broke myself trying to prove otherwise. The room buzzed with the weight of words they couldn't dodge. Then came the twist they didn't expect. I pulled out a slim envelope and slid it onto the table. What's this? Mom asked, voice shaky. An invitation. Bright Path is launching a national literacy initiative. I've chosen Maple Ridge Elementary, the school where you taught, Mom, as one of the pilot sites. They'll get brand new tablets, adaptive software, full funding. Kids here will have the kind of opportunities one had to fight tooth and nail for. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes filling with tears. Dad blinked. You do that after everything? I met his gaze evenly. Yes, because the children in this town deserve better. And because I refuse to let bitterness define me. I paused, letting the silence thicken. But don't mistake this for erasing what's been done. This is me reclaiming the narrative. You couldn't see me then. Now the whole town will. Evan finally spoke, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. So you really are the boss. And I'm just... Evan. I almost pitted him. Almost. You've always been more than just Evan, I said. The difference is, I had to build myself from nothing while you were handed the stage. Maybe now you'll learn what it means to stand on your own. For once, he had no comeback. I stood, grabbed my bag, and headed for the door. At the threshold, I turned back. You wanted me to understand, to need less, to give more. I did all of that. And now it's your turn. I left them sitting there, stunned and silent, in the same kitchen where my story had so often been muted. As I drove away, the air tasted lighter. Not because everything was healed, far from it, but because I'd finally stopped waiting for their validation. The revenge wasn't in cruel words or cutting ties. It was in thriving, in giving back on my own terms, in forcing them to see me for who I had become. And somewhere deep down, I knew the real twist. My success wasn't just proof to them. It was proof to me that the girl with the forgotten birthdays had carved herself into someone unforgettable. Driving out of Maple Ridge, I caught a glimpse of the porch swaying in the breeze, the same one that had creaked through my childhood. For years, that swing symbolized everything I wasn't, noticed, cherished, celebrated. But as the road opened before me, I realized I no longer needed their spotlight. I had built my own. My family may never fully understand the weight of the choices they made, or the scars their neglect left behind. But I know this. I am no longer defined by their blind spots. I am defined by the company I built, the children who will learn because of it, and the strength I forged in silence. And while they sit with the echoes of my words, I carry something else entirely. A new clarity, a new freedom, and a life that belongs wholly to me. So I'll ask you this. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent? Or would you have chosen to reveal everything as I did? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your stories. And if mine resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of family, resilience, and the power of being truly seen. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge